Hello, and welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast, your weekly dose of inspiration and exploration. Join me, your host, Sam Harris, as I discover how mindset can help you do incredible things through my conversations with the world's most interesting people, from tech billionaires to leading scientists, best-selling authors to notorious hackers. The goal is to increase our collective wisdom and attitudes to make us all happier and healthier, wiser and wealthier. Who doesn't want that? The podcast today is mind-boggling and yet awesomely inspiring. If you've even slightly enjoyed any of my podcasts before, then I think you will love this. So Shifra is a brain-computer interface programmer. Okay, that already sounds really cool, doesn't it? So I got in touch with her because I'd read some of her blogs and I just found that her way of explaining things was really insightful, and I thought she'd be a great person to have on the podcast because it's a pretty cool topic and I'd love to talk about it. I was really shocked when she then replied to me telling me that she was only 16 years old. And I was like, what? And then I was a bit apprehensive and thought that perhaps she might be just a little bit delusional and maybe she had some very high opinions of herself. But I thought, you know what, I'll interview her anyway. Who knows? And oh my God, I don't think I've ever learned quite so much about life, the future, science, humans, and even the existential nature of reality as we perceive it. And I learned it all from a 16-year-old, which is crazy. I was worried that she might be quite intelligent, but perhaps flawed by the fact that she's used to being intelligent and assume that she knows everything, and actually then dumber than she could be because she thinks she's so intelligent. But actually, she was really humble, and she managed to ask me some really great questions. And I think she managed to learn more from me with her questions than any of my other guests to date have, which just shows that she was just really hungry to learn as much as possible. And she was really candid with her own difficulties and feelings and just went straight to the heart of some of the biggest problems. And we just discussed some things that have existentially perplexed me my entire life, but I haven't really been able to speak about properly before. So yeah, her thirst for knowledge is huge, and she's definitely got the right mindset of seeking to know what is true rather than proving herself correct. And I'm certain she's going to go a very long way, and she's already setting herself up for massive opportunities at such a young age. It's rather incredible. So we do talk quite fast in this podcast, which is mildly unprofessional. And if you listen to podcasts on double speed, you might want to knock it back a little bit, or you may well miss most of things because of, it's pretty fast paced. And to provide some context of the stuff that we're explaining in the podcast, Shifra is part of a scheme called the Knowledge Society, which becomes abbreviated to TKS. And this was founded by Naveed and Nadeem Nathu, who are some brothers, with a mission to help solve the world's most important problems by empowering young people with an education and an environment that the brothers wished that they had had whilst they were growing up. It's based on the concept that we can train Olympic-level athletes from a really young age. So why can't we train Olympic-level CEOs and innovators at a young age? So TKS is literally building a generation of Elon Musk, which is super cool. We go much deeper into explaining the whole thing in the episode, but that should just help make sense of it all. And you should know that before I started recording, I quickly realized that there wasn't really going to be any preamble warm-up between me and her, and that everything we spoke about was just, it's going to be super interesting. So I kind of just hit record as we were talking, and we basically start with me asking about her blog and how it's been able to give her other opportunities as well as what she's already doing. And that was quite an insightful start to the conversation. And so yes, on that note, we are ready to go into the interview. If you are driving or operating heavy machinery or doing heart surgery or something, you might want to stop doing that, because honestly, Shifra is about to blow your brain into another dimension. Who else have you kind of been able to get in touch with from starting a blog?
So this is the sickest, this is by no means a normal occurrence, but I met one of the dudes from Major Lazer the other day, which was sick.
What?
Yeah, Jillionaire. Jillionaire was yo, BCI stuff, super sick. I met Ariel, who's the founder of Muse, through it as well, and then just some other BCI developers. So there's this dude who runs this blog called EEG Hacker, And it's one of the resources that I use myself. And it was awesome.
Cool. So how did you go about starting the blog anyway?
This is super hard to explain. So with TKS, there's an opt-in program called Velocity. And basically it's just a bunch of like weekly requirements where you go super, super hard on them. So it's blogs. You have to set up like 5 meetings every week with someone you think is cool. And you just do a lot of it until you get kind of good at it. So I know another girl who's also doing some BCI stuff in the same program as me recently got to set up a meeting with Brian Johnson, who is the CEO of Kernel, which was pretty sick. So there's that. It's a tried and true method. And also because the brothers or our directors are from Silicon Valley themselves, they have their own network, and we're always at conferences just connecting with people. So it's you just talk to people and then it compounds.
Can we just step back and can you explain what TKS is again?
2 brothers, both in Silicon Valley. One worked for McKinsey. The other one sold his company Airpost to Box. Realized that there was no program that kind of allowed young people to become super good at leveraging exponential technologies to solve essentially what are going to be some of the biggest problems humanity is facing. So they were like, what is logical? And then they started a program which basically takes high school students and then they teach you how to leverage or work with exponential technologies. And it's kind of structured to be a 3-year program. So first year, you just do a lot of projects and kind of get like a broad knowledge of like different types of exponential technologies that you're into. So like quantum computing, brain-computer interfaces, nanotechnology, all of that stuff. Second year, you go in and you do a lot of targeted industry applications. So you just talk to a lot of people to identify pain points. And then, yeah, so we have a couple of people that have like connections at YC or the Teal Foundation. So actually, this one guy who's like 14 years old has funding from the Teal Foundation. He's a year ahead in the program. And it's just super awesome being surrounded by people that are just constantly doing pretty awesome stuff, meeting really cool people.
Yeah, this sounds amazing. I've got quite a few questions now. So the first one is, do you then not go to school? And this is like your main school, as in you carry on with normal education? I
was actually in the IB program for the last like 2 years, like the pre-IB program. And then this semester, I started doing online school full time. So I'm doing online high school, getting my Canadian diploma, and then also just doing TKS full time because we have this thing called co-op. I don't know how similar the systems are, but for co-op, it's a job placement that you can do in high school, and you get either 2 high school credits or 4 high school credits. So I might be doing that as well. But I am enrolled in high school right now.
That's fascinating. So you do carry on with that, but then how do people get into the TKS? Are you like, do you just find out about it and enter, or do they try and just find like brainiest people they possibly can?
No, you apply. There's like an application process. There's an interview process. Sometimes they'll do like group interviews, presentations, and they don't really gauge for like, you're not expected to know about these exponential technologies before you come in, because the Canadian high school system definitely does not, or any high school system, I don't think, optimizes for the kind of things that TKS teaches you. So it's really just how driven you are and what level of like intellectual horsepower you're willing to bring into the program.
Yeah, sure. Because I was literally just talking with my friends about you being like, you're going to need to know quite a lot about the brain. You know, I studied biology at university, and I wouldn't have been able to do something like this as a 16-year-old. All the fact that, and then my friend's a computer scientist, and he wouldn't have been able to do this either by himself. And we're like, well, how the hell is she doing like stuff that requires both of our degrees together that we can't even do, but we've got degrees in this thing, and she's like 16. We were trying to work that out. And then, so I guess it's more like you just start learning it straight away. So you're kind of learning all of the things that we've kind of been learning already.
Yeah. The mindset is just like, you just figure it out. You just got to learn how to figure stuff out.
Yeah. Doing that as a 16, 17-year-old, you need some serious level maths to be doing that.
Yeah. I have really supportive parents. It's very hard for the kind of things that I do to click with a lot of people that have been in a very like conservative traditional schooling environment. So TKS, the way it's structured, it's definitely very unconventional. You have people that are being blown out by like say Microsoft or like Collision, and sometimes that aligns with like your exams, for example. I don't think a lot of people understand the importance of like gaining unconventional success by taking an unconventional path. It's all about getting unconventional success by taking an unconventional path, because most 16 or 17 or we even have like kids that are like 12 years old working in like nanotech and genetic engineering. And it's like the way the system works just isn't optimized for that. But how do you actually begin to optimize for that? To just build unicorn people, as we call them. So there's a concept of unicorn companies where basically $1 billion valuation, but for unicorn people, it's like, how do you impact 1 billion people? And I don't think that's necessarily something that most like high school curriculum teach. And it's all about how do you begin to optimize for that?
That is a really cool concept. I love it. Yeah, I definitely do think that like the whole principle of how do you become a millionaire or a billionaire is you have to like help lives and improve life for like 1 billion people. But then actually thinking of yourself as a unicorn person is a really cool principle rather than having it to do with the company that you're building. It's more about yourself, which I think is part of that point of investing in people early. I got into an accelerator when I was at my university, and so I took it all super seriously, and most of the people who weren't actually successful. And then I was kind of questioning, like, why the hell are you doing this? Half these people are failing, or 90% of people are failing. What's the point? Yeah. Why are you even doing this? And they're like, oh, well, actually, we're saying it's to make you like succeed and sort of have this great business, but really we're more just like teaching you the principle of how to do it. And we're providing a safe space so you can kind of learn and like expand your horizons and sort of fail in a safe environment. And then like later you're going to be more successful. So as in like you guys are super young, you're not probably going to start like $1 billion company straight away, but actually providing the groundwork and setting the foundations to become an awesome human being. By the time you are 25, 30, you're going to be starting awesome companies kind of thing.
Yeah, you got it.
And maybe some of you will do something straight away, but it's you're in the right environment to be doing this the rest of your life kind of thing. I'm just insanely jealous of the fact that kind of thing existed. I didn't enter my brain until I was like 20. Yeah. And you're already years ahead of me. Yeah, this is great. So you mentioned some of the other things that TKS does, like ML. Do they do anything on CRISPR?
Oh yeah. So basically we've had people that are like in genetic engineering or like human longevity. A couple of us work in like some really big labs here in Canada. A couple of my friends actually, they're doing CRISPR like with ML, and they're trying to basically start piloting in one of the biggest hospitals in Canada, I think in about 2 months time. And they're like 17, which is insane. Personally, I'm not super involved in the field yet. But they are, and they're doing some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. Do you learn about like the ethics of what you're doing and how you're going to get it adopted? Because when I studied biology, we went through like the whole genetic engineering chaos that happened because in Europe it's still kind of illegal. Yeah. And it was just like a massive branding fail of something that could so massively help the world. Yeah. But people hated. And there's lots of stuff that you're doing that's super important for the world, but if it's branded wrong, there's going to be kickback. So what have you learned around that to make it more acceptable?
So in terms of like the ethics, a lot of the stuff that we do is like fairly moonshot. So it's not necessarily going to materialize in like 10 to 15 years, but it's also, so the core principle that we focus on is just empathy and being able to optimize for like, how do you train yourself to be more empathetic? And then the ethics discussions, we have a lot of really like philosophical debates in TKS, and it's the whole concept of like a philosopher king. It's how do you train yourself to make the best decisions for humanity? And it's something I personally grapple with because I'm like, you can very well infringe on someone's autonomy and justify it by being like, oh, I'm making the best decision for them. We're not particularly averse to authority. So it's very easy to just like blindly listen to what our director might like tell us. And by the directors, I mean the two brothers who started the program and who run the program. But they've been very intentional about making sure that we come to like conclusions ourselves. So I don't know where everyone else is regarding the issue, but I'm still kind of grappling with, well, you know, what if it does more harm than it does good? And also like, what if I am infringing on someone's authority, but it's like, it's for the greater good. And it's like,
who decides what the greater good is?
Yeah, it is. It's hard. I don't know where I stand on it yet, but hopefully I will figure it out.
Yeah, sounds like you can need like a proper whole set of like philosophy lectures, really. Yeah. There's so much things. So there's a good principle because, you know, like Christianity or most religions is like treat others how you want to be treated or whatever, but it really should be treat others how they want to be treated.
Oh, yeah.
Except for you then have to allow for the fact that some people have things that are kind of wrong, like, you know, raping children or whatever. You obviously aren't going to let them just go and do that because that's how they want to be treated. And it just becomes a bit of a chaotic minefield. But yeah, the stuff that you're dealing with is definitely going to be super impactful. And there was an interesting debate at the CogX conference around if we genetically engineer humans, which will probably start happening soon. Is it right to have that allowed for like rich people and not for poor people if they're going to have like children who are richer than, who are just more intelligent than everyone else? is this wrong,
Yep.
and like letting them acquire like more wealth faster. What would you have you learned an ethical debate around this to come back at that answer, or what would your answer be?
I think to some extent it's justified in the existing framework. So I want to think of the world as an optimization problem, and given the like current parameters, because you do live in a capitalistic world, I think it's fairly justified. But I would also very much want to focus on how do you come up with an alternative where it's a lot more just. And obviously that's super, super, super idealistic. But I think like super idealistic conversations are very important because, for example, the whole concept of Web3 and making internet and like information a lot more like accessible and like democratized. It's super hard. And I know a lot of my answers are very controversial even in TKS. But for me, it's just, if you're living in an existing capitalistic system, it makes sense. But I want to focus my energy in like coming up with an alternative, but I don't know how I would go about doing that. Again, it's just like practicality or principle.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point on it. So I didn't think anyone really gave a good answer. It was like the question was put to like a bunch of experts on this, and they all kind of came back with something useless. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I guess it's kind of bad, but it probably will happen. And you're like, well, great. But I did think in some ways you could argue that it actually sort of is a good thing. Yeah. Because if you think of like, basically it's going to be rich kids that get this thing first and are going to become more intelligent. But what if currently rich kids, they still exist and they're still going to have like this huge step up in life. But if half of them are stupid or annoying and they just, people like on Love Island or whatever, is that useful to society, or is it better to have like the people that are going to inherit most of the money on the earth are super intelligent and are going to be like really sensible about it? It seems like this is probably the best thing for humanity if all the rich kids are also super smart and actually quite good, because of most smart people I know think a bit more about humanity in a better level rather than just being like selfish and wanting to like have flashy cars and things. Yeah. And so probably like ethically speaking, I think it's probably the best thing that can happen in the world is that we make all rich people super smart, because they'll at least be like useful to humanity and we won't even worry about money so much.
Make the people. So the thing we talk about in TKS is that everyone has an opinion, but a lot of like, and I'm not saying opinions don't matter, but a lot of opinions will not matter, because if you can't do anything about it, you're not going to actually have impact. So it's all about how do you train the people that will have impact to make the best decisions possible? Again, very slippery slope, like super conditional, but I think as a principle, it makes sense.
Nice. I like that principle. Good tangent. I enjoyed that. Back to brain-computer interface stuff. Just because you've been writing some really interesting blogs and I've been learning from them, I was like, wow, this person's cool. I'd love to talk to them. Then found out that you were 16. I was like, holy Jesus, what the hell's going on? But got over that. Yeah, I guess I'd just like to go back to learning a bit more about brain-computer interfaces, because so you first heard about it from joining TKS, or were you interested in it before?
No, I knew about it like before TKS. I'd read the neural dust papers, and like I knew about like Neuralink and what Elon Musk was doing, and I just thought it was like super fascinating because it's like such a big paradigm shift from our just perception of humanity as it is. And also because like Toronto's a very big tech hub, and everywhere you go, it's just ML and artificial intelligence. And it's like, yeah, those things are growing exponentially, but human intelligence remains like very stagnant. And to me, the technology was just super, super fascinating. So I knew about it a little bit before TKS. Yeah.
Cool. What are the neural dust papers for people who are less smart than you?
So it's the best way to explain it at a very high level is that it's merging brain-computer interface technology with basically nanobots to optimize for a bunch of different things. So it's basically just a marriage between nanotechnology and things on the nanoscale and brain-computer interfaces and making. So one of the biggest problems with brain-computer interface technology right now is that the hardware is really big. It's like, it sucks. And it's super expensive. And it's how do you shrink that so that it can get past like the blood-brain barrier, for example, and just optimize for a bunch of cool things.
Oh, cool. So they're like the real-life version of, have you read there's this thing called Nexus, which is essentially neural dust.
Ooh,
but, yeah, if you haven't read it, it's a great series.
Will do.
But by the end, it gets a little bit confusing. But it's really interesting to think of what humanity would be like when everyone can like literally be talking to each other instantly with this stuff going on in their brains and have like entire capacity to do things. It's sort of like Matrix meets real life be
fun.
I don't know, lots of cool stuff going on. So yeah, it's a super topical book for your degree. Well, you're not doing a degree for your research and things that you're doing. Yeah, did you read the Tim Urban Neuralink stuff?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the Wait But Why.
That's a big post. Yeah.
Yeah, love that blog.
Cool. Did that encourage you to go into this, or did you read that after you'd already started?
Actually, I read that after. I read that quite a few months after I'd been introduced to like BCI stuff. I think what really scared me is because even before I was in TCAS, like I'd seen Black Mirror.
Oh yeah.
And then DARPA, which I call DARPA the mad science wing of the US military. They're literally developing brain chips for soldiers. And I was like, this is insane. This is actually insane. And they're investing millions into it. And it ties back into the whole principle of how do you become someone who actually manages to like make important decisions in the field? It is insane.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. For someone that hasn't read those posts, what's the important thing about brain-computer interfaces that a normal person might not have realized, just for people to understand?
Yeah. So brain-computer interfaces are a huge field of basically what you do is that you establish a direct communication link between your brain and an external device. That's all that is. Like you can do literally anything you want with it in capacity. So you could like play Flappy Bird with it, but like control with your blinks or your brain waves, for example. But the cooler stuff is like downloading information into your brain. Like DARPA did this controlled study where they took two pilots. One was a novice and the other one was actually super experienced. And they used this thing called transcranial magnetic stimulation, which stimulates certain parts of your brain. And they were able to take some of that knowledge, and I'm not going to get like super deep into it. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but they were able to see like a transfer in knowledge. And they've also used transcranial magnetic stimulation to be able to increase focus levels or like your comprehension of like abstract math concepts. And a bunch of people are using it now to cure depression. And there's these headsets that are actually being approved by the FDA that are being used by therapists as an alternative to like cognitive behavioral therapy to target depression and anxiety by basically zapping your brain. And all of that stuff is happening right now. Like we have like brain to brain communication at like a very low level exists right now. So where the field's going to go in 10 years coupled with like artificial general intelligence or whatever, like my head can't even conceptualize any of that. But basically it's just you're connecting your brains to the cloud or like any external device. But think about the ethics. Like for example, Facebook right now is their BCI division is basically working on letting people type with their brains. After the whole Cambridge Analytica thing, do you actually want Facebook to have access to all of that data? Like that's the question. Is you get access to it.
So with any emerging technologies, we always kind of do things a bit wrong, and we kind of it has to get broken, and sort of they have to do it. Like Facebook itself is just causing so much depression and like general issues, and like the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal and like the Russia stuff. So it kind of has to go too far to then sort of realize how it should be. But it's super worrying when it's like stuff going on in your brain and your thoughts that it's pretty much inevitable that something would go wrong if we just let it just extend itself naturally with capitalism doing what it wants to the point where we actually kind of come in and kind of regulate it. It is, quite scary. But hopefully it's good. But then there's the other side that if we can, which is why Elon Musk is getting involved in it, is because if we can bring it to market so quickly that humans can just become super intelligent pretty fast, then we are less likely going to have problems with like the AGI issue, which is the other big thing going on these days. But yeah, do you think having brain-computer interfaces would mean that human society would be able to like become massively super intelligent, and things like a super intelligent AI would just not be a problem?
I have literally zero clue. And I think about this very often. It's like, it's also depending on like what you use the technology for, but I also think you're opening up like a completely different box when you're talking about like super intelligence. So it's very easy to think of stuff in like a super Western context, but also like there's regimes that are opposed to stuff like blockchain. So to get them on board with stuff like BCIs is also going to be like a completely different task. And then also like in terms of like propaganda, you're going to want to ask yourself whether that's even like something that you want to delve into, because what if you can couple propaganda with like BCI stuff and then it's not the fault of the individual anymore, you could argue. I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen. Like, I don't see the point in having an opinion about something that I'm just not informed. Like, I don't have any data points. So to me, it just doesn't check out in my brain.
That's good. Glad to hear that you're thinking sensibly about it. Because, some people seem to come up with opinions. And, often you get like people that are kind of a bit more philosophy and think that they're really cool, and then they're not really that hard science into it, and they don't even understand the things they're talking about. And you're a bit like, well, I don't even know why you have an opinion. It's quite annoying that the people with opinions are the ones that shouldn't. And maybe someone like you, perhaps maybe in a previous time, would be in the best place to have an opinion, but you'd probably still be there like, well, I'm still completely on the fence because we have no idea.
Yep.
Then that doesn't really make like news or get people to listen to you, which is another problem with like fake news and social media and stuff being shared. But yes, back to BCIs. So how would they actually work then? Are you going into like the different ways? Because like in your blog, you sort of seem to explain the main different ways like a BCI could work and what kind of things are going on there. So could you, explain those?
BCI is huge field. So at a very high level, there's three different types of BCI. So there's invasive, partially invasive, and completely non-invasive BCIs. And generally, the non-invasive and partially invasive ones are the ones that have the lowest amount of like spatiotemporal resolution. So they're not necessarily as effective.
Can you just explain spatiotemporal resolution before that?
There's just a lot of noise. So brain-computer interfaces pick up on like brain data, but they also pick up on stuff like you blinking, for example, that creates a lot of noise, or you chewing, or you just moving your head. And the more invasive it is, the clearer those signals are. And that's basically what I mean. So I've only been exposed to non-invasive brain-computer interfaces because partially invasive and fully invasive brain-computer interfaces, A, they're super expensive, and B, like there's a lot of regulation surrounding them. And also, we just don't know how they work. So people with various different neurodegenerative diseases that have had brain chips implanted into their brain have actually like suffered from depression because we just couldn't predict what that chip in the brain would be like. So all this stuff I've done is just completely non-invasive. It's very like high level stuff. There's definitely cooler stuff being done with like nanotech and optogenetics and all these other fascinating technologies. So it really just depends on what kind of BCI application you're talking about. Like there's obviously the really like cool stuff, typing with your brain and like a brain computer interface Facebook, for example. But then there's also like other use cases that, like for meditation, for example, a lot of BCI companies are focused on just like mindful meditating and how do you optimize that by actually getting insights from your brain, or how do you gauge like your emotional reaction to something or your emotional state using brain computer interfaces. So it really just depends on the use case.
Cool. So you've mainly been doing things in non-invasive then. How are you going around actually creating brain-computer interfaces then? The
ones that I've worked with, you use a non-invasive headband to basically pick up on your brain signals, and then you write code that optimizes it for a certain output. But I have been in touch with a couple of researchers that are doing cool things. So I recently got in touch with a researcher who's actually using natural language processing to be able to detect dementia earlier on by using brain data. And I think that's super fascinating. There are obviously people that are way more, like way smarter than me in the field. And it's all about how do I communicate with them about how passionate and excited I am about this field, and how do I get them to want to support me? People skills matter so much. Like your skills are so important. And obviously, like with any exponential technology, it's very hard to just do stuff in isolation. So it's like people in TKS also who've done stuff that I haven't done or who've worked with the technology beforehand, but also like other really smart people. So I recently got in touch with Steve Mann, who's basically like a neurotech god. Like he is insane. And I got to like visit his lab and talk to him about like what he's doing and just get advice on like how to catalyze my growth. And it's just, people want to help. Like it is so awesome. Like people are like, people just always want to help. And it's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's definitely make the most of it. I mean, you've still got ages of being young, which is nice.
Yeah.
But, it is a little bit easier whilst you're kind of super young and cool, because it's a nice thing to be able to help young people. I think a lot of people still are really keen, as as you get older, especially if you carry on blogging and just sort of putting things out and you show that you're actually trying to help the world as well. I think it will be a really easy thing to keep going and have more of the stuff going on. Yeah, back to you speak very fast and there's so much going on. It's amazingly interesting. But you mentioned that you just using like a headband as the brain computer interface. So how does that work to pick up brainwaves?
So the one that I use, I've experimented with a couple. I've used the NeuroSky. I've used the Muse. I like working with the Muse because, I don't know, I just picked it up. But basically, it has a bunch of electrodes. So 2 behind both of your ears and then 2 on your forehead. And then there's actually a secret like hack where you can actually plug in a 5th electrode. And that electrode just picks up on like all of your brain activity like a regular electrode would. So it's just raw EEG data that you can then stream onto like some of like the developer tools. You can use Muse Direct, and then stream it over to like a Python file or whatever. But then also because it's raw EEG, you need to be able to like learn how to process it and then be able to like actually extract the insights that you want from it. And then also like how do you get rid of noise? So because I work with the non-invasive headband, with the Muse especially, every time I blink, for example, there will be a spike in my raw data because it doesn't just pick up on data, it also picks up on a bunch of noise. And a lot of people optimize for that noise, but also like you can get rid of it if you want to work with some more like complex stuff like concentration thresholds. How do you train like a computer to basically be able to look at all of your like raw EEG data and be able to tell when you're concentrated or not? So that kind of stuff.
Yeah, wow. So I originally just thought Muse was just like the meditation headband thing. So
Yep.
Is it like the same device, but they just use it for other things because of it just picks up in your brainwaves?
Yeah, so it's really supposed to be used for meditation because it just like it's picking up on your EEG data and then it's telling you whether like you're meditating effectively or not. But also like if it's picking up on your brain activity, you can basically use it to do a bunch of cool stuff. So yeah, I don't use it for meditation.
Ah, that's so cool. Because it just sort of comes as a product that's packaged in the branding that says, hey, this is a device for meditating. You wouldn't think, oh, cool, I can like learn how to control my vehicle or something with this thing. But I mean, maybe that might never happen. But you know what I mean? As in, you wouldn't sort of think about these other ways. But that's certainly where like the coolest inventions come from when you think, oh, great, I've got a smartphone, but also it's got a GPS and suddenly I can do these other things and I can rate Uber or whatever. Who knows what's going to come from this sort of device? This is awesome. I'm so excited. Okay. So anyway, you then explained that Muse is just a device rather than a meditation thing, and then went into programming it. So how do you filter the EEG data? So you use like Python or?
Yeah, I worked with Python. So for the first BCI application that I built, I actually optimized for noise. So the dinosaur game that pops up in Chrome when you don't have Wi-Fi, I basically because it was picking up on like my quote unquote brain activity, and there was a like sizable jump every time I would blink, I basically optimized my output for the blink. But then the second one that I did, and this was kind of stupid of me because I also have another headset where I wouldn't have to program any of this and I could have just like jumped directly into it because it comes with a built-in like concentration threshold. But for the Muse, because it works with your raw EEG, they have this app called Muse Direct, which basically helps you visualize and like stream all your data. I sent it over to my Mac as an OSC file. And then from there onwards, it was just like, I explained this in my blog as well. This is super high level. It's different types of brainwaves actually correlate to you being concentrated. So basically what you have to be able to do is you need to be able to take all of your raw data. So all of your brainwaves that just basically come out as one, and then you need to be able to separate them into their different bands. So you can figure out which one correlates to you being concentrated versus which one doesn't. So if you program like a really basic fast Fourier transform onto it, it basically splits the data into different like bands of, I don't want to say concentration, but that probably makes most sense. And then what you do is you state that if it's between this threshold, and then you need to basically you experiment to see what your concentration threshold is, or you can go with kind of like an average. And then it's basically, if it's under or like above this threshold, you optimize for this output.
Yeah. You said the type of file that you transferred across?
Basically, every time I put on the Muse, it streams the data to my phone. And then from my phone, I send over that data to my Mac as an OSC file or an OSC stream. And then from there on onwards, it's just programming a fast Fourier transform onto the raw data so I can separate that like one line of brain activity into like alpha waves and beta waves and like delta waves and all of that stuff.
Cool. So how come you can't just write an application for your Mac that just interfaces directly with the Muse?
Oh yeah, the Muse doesn't offer a lot of support for the Mac. It's really sad. Yeah.
Oh well, sounds like you're hacking your way to a good thing. Do you think the TKS will maybe try and make their own device at some point, so you're not using a Muse? Or
I've been trying to persuade some of my friends that I think are smarter than me into doing it, but I don't think they will currently. But it'd be super sick if they could. I know one of my friends is working on building a transcranial magnetic stimulation device, so it's not necessarily like picking up on brain data. It's more so like zapping your brain, as I put it. But also, like, you risk electrocuting yourself and trying to do that. So potentially, I think it'd be really cool.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel there's a huge business opportunity in, like, like Raspberry Pi, but like one like that, but a Muse version for just like hacking away on it instantly. That would be so awesome.
Like OpenBCI does stuff like that, but it's
I'm pretty sure we can start a Kickstarter tomorrow and it will kick off. Like,
but OpenBCI is like very cheap, but it's cheap for like researchers, not when you're like a high school student. It's like, it's tough.
So very cool. Okay, and then from that data, so have you been able to, because you said you could see when you were blinking physically, have you been able to think, I'm going to blink, but then not blink, as in just sort of think the word or something? Or
no, I haven't done that. So the first one, it was just I'd blink, and it would jump the date, like there would be a jump in the data. And then for the second one, it was I would count back from 50, but with an interval of like 2, and that's how I would concentrate. That's when the car would go forward, essentially, because that's when I'd be concentrated.
Oh, interesting. Going to be quite simple for a long time before we get it to really cool stuff. But is it not a bit of a massive error with the blinking one of when you're playing the game that sometimes you just need to blink because you need to blink and then it's kind of screwed? Or is it okay because you're blinking so often anyway that you can stop yourself?
I mean, for the blink, I optimized it for a game where I'd have to be blinking like very often. So it was fine. Like the only problem that I faced with that one is that sometimes I'd blink and it just wouldn't pick up on it. But that was also my first time working with the Muse. And what I didn't know is that you need to tie your hair up because your hair just causes a lot of interference with the electrodes. So that's why my signal wasn't clear, but that's really the only problem I faced with that one. Yeah.
So have you done much around like psychology and brain development and things?
Just enough for me to build my BCI stuff. So a common misconception is that you need to like have a very in-depth understanding of how the brain works in order to be able to build BCI applications. And then for a lot of the use cases, that's very true. But if you're just doing stuff with non-invasive BCIs, then you just need to be able to like learn about the different types of brainwaves, how to optimize for that. But that's really not what my focus has been. I might be moving more so into it, especially if I do continue the whole transcranial magnetic stimulation stuff, for example. You definitely need to be super knowledgeable about the brain in order to be able to pull that off. But even like the other stuff, like NLP and dementia, even for that, like you just need a sizable data set, but not a very deep understanding of how the brain works. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah, you hit on some big topics there, which I'd like to go into. So transcranial
magnetic stimulation.
That's the word. Yes. Tongue twister, right? Yes, transcranial magnetic stimulation. Yeah, do you think you'll be able to go into that in the future, or have you looked into that a bit already?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think I'm going to build like a TMS like headset again because like electrocution. Although I think there is a research paper that I came across the other day, like walking you through the steps of building a TMS system yourself.
Sweet.
Yeah, pretty sick.
Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, so my focus isn't to like completely revolutionize that technology. I have been looking into it, but only like I've been getting in contact with a bunch of people to see what you could potentially use it for. So what I find really interesting is that there's actually this headset that I touched upon earlier that's using TMS to basically cure depression and cure, like quote unquote cure. But it basically helps people with depression because it zaps the part of their brain that is associated with depression and stimulates it in a way that causes you to be less depressed. And like that is so fascinating to me. But the problem with that like field in specific is that it's super, super regulated. And also there's a bunch of health risks. Like it's regulated because there's a bunch of health risks that we don't understand that are associated with it. So for me, I'm just trying to figure out like, what is a really cool problem that I could leverage this technology to solve? But that's really as far as like I've delved into it.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. So I think it kind of links into what you may have been mentioning was like a study in rats where they kind of one rat like went through a maze and worked out how to get through, whilst the other one that was stimulated like on the other side of the earth, but then got put in the same maze. Yeah.
We did it in the Tetris game, which was like so sick. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, you said you were trying to think about cool problems that you could solve. So you just haven't come up with any specifically useful ones, or you haven't decided which ones you want to tackle?
Like it's really, really easy to come up with problems, but it's also like what problems are the smartest to tackle? Because obviously you need an economic incentive. You also need to be able to like actually deliver on a product. And then you also like need to ensure that people aren't going to be super freaked out when you actually deliver it. So the caveat here is that I'm probably a lot more like technical in the field than other people my age, but like I still don't understand the implications of the technology well enough to be able to actually deliver a solution, I would think. Maybe it's because I'm scared, but like I don't know. Like with BCI stuff, it's just super, super hard for it to be like medically related. So all the cool stuff that I know is happening is either being done by like billionaires who have the leverage that technology because they have the money and the resources and the connections. Like Brian Johnson invested $100 million into kernel. Like I can't do that, obviously. And to me, it makes most sense to be like talking to researchers and other people who are fairly established in the field. But then all of the people that I know that are doing really, really cool stuff are doing it with like really bulky headsets, and it's like in hospitals and in labs, and obviously that's not necessarily scalable. So there's a lot of problems, and not all of them, I would think, have a solution right now with the technology and the regulations that are going to be scalable at least for the next like 10, 15 years.
What were the sort of ideas that have most excited you that you thought about? If the world was your oyster and you were able to like deliver on everything else thereafter, what was like your biggest kind of like, oh, I wish I could design this for myself?
I think this is like super idealistic, like super moonshot. I think downloading consciousness would be super fun, or just being able to encapsulate like some, or like at a lower level, I think this is actually not that moonshot, is whole brain emulation. And there's a bunch of like really cool stuff like being like done in Europe, like I think it was, what is it called? The Blue Brain Project, or a bunch of different projects that are just focused on whole brain emulation. And I think that is so, so fascinating. But also another problem is that the tech isn't too big on open source, I don't think. Especially with these like larger projects, like the most you're going to find is like open access EEG data. So what I'd really love to be able to do is just work on whole brain emulation and figure out a way to scale it. I don't know what the use case would be, because the technology in and of itself is so, so cool, but that would be so freaking interesting.
Yes, that would be ridiculously interesting. Yeah, I mean, maybe another 10 years or something for, who knows. I mean, I remember when I started my degree, it was still like, it was like £1 million to get a genome or something. And now, you know, you can get your 23andMe kit straight away, and these things happen. And it's, 10 years time, we'll be reflecting on this conversation. Like, oh, I remember when we thought about that. It would be like, just seems so unrealistic. And now here I am. And like, here's this little mini me in my phone that's with my entire consciousness thinking for me. And it's going to be weird, but it's exciting. Maybe it's 50 years. Maybe it's 5, but
it's scary.
Yeah, definitely. And then the whole ethics of like, if it is your whole brain, then is this just like a whole real person? And
like, what if someone hacks your brain, forces you to commit a crime? Like, it's going to be really interesting to see how like long established institutions have like adapt to like not just brain computer interfaces, but like almost all exponential technologies like blockchain or quantum even. Yeah.
The last few years already shown that like politics and everything is massively broken as it is. And then like education is, you know, it's a system that was designed 2 centuries ago, being taught by people from the last century to people currently in this century who are just like, what the fuck, this isn't useful. And there's a lot of stuff that is going to have some monumental shifts. especially with this kind of stuff coming
How do you
online.
think of the world as an like optimization problem? That's really just it. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I like your constantly coming back to this. This is a good way to apply logic around things. Yeah, I wish I'd been taught these things when I was younger.
Because I still think my mental models are very skewed. Yeah, like I do not think that my outlook to life, or I don't want to say it's like health. I think it's fairly healthy. I think I'm a happy person. I genuinely don't think that my mental models are really that great.
It's only just recently in my own, not that old age, that I'm starting to really understand the wisdom of like older people.
Yeah.
And like, I guess I couldn't really conceptualize properly when I was being taught history and things that stuff was really real, like the Second World War and like other things, or even someone that had been traveling and had like stories to tell. I couldn't take it that seriously somehow until I'd been traveling and I'd done all these things, and I'd tell people and I could recognize that they didn't quite understand what I was saying to them. And I realized that the thing that was really real to me was obviously just as real to the other person that had been telling me the thing before. Mm-hmm. For me to then conceptualize that actually the thing that they are saying is actually really real and really important, and that I could learn a lot more from it if I took it more seriously.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's okay for me to say that, but I don't know how I can really sort of push that into someone else's brain. But maybe if you're more intelligent, then you might get it faster than it took me.
We call it the salt and vinegar analogy. It's that you can delve into a lot of mindsets and mental models and like different ways of thinking, but if you don't have the experience to accompany it, then like it's just not going to click. Yeah, so life experience is super important.
So do they sort of say that you should maybe try and go traveling for a year or something before college?
Yeah. Traveling, I think, that'd be interesting. But it's also like on a smaller level, it's just constantly doing discomfort challenges.
Nice.
Because you learn a lot and you like,
definitely.
Yeah. I think one of the ones we did was like singing like a Disney song on the subway, or getting someone to let you like drive around like a subway car, which like sounds like you probably wouldn't learn a lot from it, but it's actually very insightful. Yeah. Yeah,
no, it is really, you sort of realize like all the conceptual boundaries that you live in and are just bollocks. And you're like, wait, why do I not do this thing? Or why do I do that thing? It's sort of so weird. And you just start questioning everything around the world. And yeah, I'm glad that you get to do those things.
Loads of fun.
That's good. So we've been going pretty deep on science and stuff, and back to a bit more general things. So do you have to work with other partners? Do you collaborate on different projects, or is it very much like a personal journey?
Oh no, it's definitely not personal. You're constantly collaborating with other. So the projects that I've done have been my own. I am working with some other people. So that researcher with NLP and dementia, hopefully we can set something up there. Even in TKS, like I'm looking into working with another BCI developer to hopefully allow like using stuff like the Muse, like a commercially available EEG headset that isn't too expensive, to basically allow people to regulate their own sleeping patterns, which I think could be interesting, but I don't know. And then it's also not just like science-based stuff. So in TKS, we do a lot of consulting challenges as well, just to basically build your understanding of the world. Because the thing behind TKS isn't that you just want to go super, super deep into the science. Like you could choose to do that. A lot of people do, but it's also how do you scale it? And having a solid understanding of the world really helps with that. So we've done a bunch of consulting challenges with Simple, Interact, Walmart, Microsoft, RBC, and it's like just being able to understand like the harsh realities of the corporate world so that you don't necessarily, like, you know how to navigate them later on.
Yeah, it's amazing, because that's one of the problems with being an entrepreneur young, is that if you never get a chance to work in a big business or have like this life experience, you don't really know how to work with these things or even know half the problems that most people are going through. But if you're going into these companies and talking to all these people, that's perfect. That's something I haven't really had so much of an opportunity to do, which is part of why I run this podcast, because I kind of go into any industry and just find out whatever's fascinating me at the time. So it looks like I might be doing a bit of a deep dive into brain-computer interfaces and AI future stuff now, because this is ridiculously fun.
And I've been working on like BCI stuff for like almost a year now, just learning about it. And over the summer, I'm basically not doing any BCI stuff because I'm interning at like a big like consultancy firm. And I'm just hoping that it helps me like understand more about the world, but also just how people are and what motivates them. Yeah. I don't think I'm very good at understanding people, which obviously is like a big problem.
Yeah, it's one of those fallacies of being quite intelligent. It's not always, but when you have a higher IQ, on average you might have like a slightly lower EQ, and just trying to like balance that. But EQ can be learned a lot more easily than IQ. Though IQ you can still develop. Yeah. They're not genetic at all. Yeah, developing that is super important. And yeah, just going into getting any experiences is always really useful. In fact, the more you know about the world, is the more ideas you have and the more like connections that you make. When you've got the viewpoint to making connections, like you've already got like the right kind of initial mindset, then you can kind of learn anything. So even when you're watching like Love Island or something, you can start learning stuff. Whereas it's like crap junk TV that most people consume when they're watching Love Island. But if you think about it from a philosophy point of view and from a psychology point of view about how these things are happening, you can start like learning lots and sort of deducing stuff. Or I'm going to go into, like, I was listening to the psychology podcast where he breaks down like all of the Game of Thrones characters as if they were like sitting on his psychiatry couch and like going into all their problems and like they're like, and you're like, wow, I've learned so much about human emotion and thoughts and why people's characters develop this way by watching Game of Thrones and then listening to a cool podcast about it. Whereas most people watch Game of Thrones and it's just sort of like junk TV that goes in and out your brain. It has no use. But if you sort of have the mindset to try and learn, you can get so much information from the world by basically doing almost anything. And so I'm feeling out of breath. This is like the fastest conversation I've ever had. I think it's bonkers. What's also really cool is that as you get older, you kind of get slightly more tired and you can't do things so much. But you're sort of so young, but doing so much cool stuff that you can kind of be having like ridiculous energy for all these things for like the next 10 years. And
it's all about like learning how to reach a higher level of happiness as early on as possible in life. So then all of your mental energy is just like spent towards being able to maintain that like higher level of happiness. And that's kind of what I want to optimize my life for.
Nice. One thing that really helped me was doing the Vipassana meditation, which is like a 10-day. When you've got lots of ideas, it's pretty overwhelming the first few days of just sitting there and your brain going completely bonkers. But then you learn so much about yourself and how you want to be in the world. And it's such a good use of your time in hindsight.
There's a 10-day retreat that's coming to Toronto. And one of my mentors was like, you should totally go do that. And now, it's just definitely. You just validated it for me.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah, anyone that does go and do it, that has a sort of slight mindset of interest and curiosity, it'll change their life. Sweet. I hope that helps you. And then, is there anything else that I should know about that I haven't already asked you?
Not particularly. I think that's pretty much it. In terms of BCI stuff, like we could probably unpack my personality. Like that is a whole other thing, and like my mental models and stuff. But it pretty much covers it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, unpack some more about your personality. So I'm interested to know, how do you approach solving your problems? Because I've sort of got a bit of an idea from the way you've explained things, but it would be nicer to hear your own opinion on that.
I think your mental model really should depend on the problem that you're trying to solve. And I'm not the best at this. So I think like approaching a consultancy project and figuring out how to approach like a big corporate problem is also very different from like a very emotional, like people oriented problem. And I'm slightly better, I would say, at approaching problems where I can probably just lay down, this is what I need to get done and this is how I'm going to get it done. And I think a really helpful mental model there is, how do you just exceed expectations? And this is kind of like a dual-edged sword because you need to be super aware of how other people are perceiving you, but also be able to entertain that in a way that you're like, oh, I want to exceed this expectation, but also I know I'm a dope, awesome person regardless of how other people perceive me. So yeah, slightly paradoxical. Being able to do that really helps because it allows you to just crush whatever you're doing. But then when it comes to people, recently, I've come to the realization that I can fake being vulnerable really, really well and really, really easily. And the reason why I do that is because I emulate other people's emotions because I don't have a very good logical process of being able to come to terms with my own emotions, especially like negative and positive emotions. So it's all about how do I surround myself with like positive people and positive triggers that just make me feel present and make me feel grounded. And I'm not a very people person, so that's interesting. And that's the problem that I'm facing right now in my life, and I don't have a certain way of approaching it. So yeah, tangent. But for other problems, it's really just consulting smart people. I think that's so overlooked. It's like, if you live in a day and an age where you're super connected to some of the smartest people in the world, why would you choose to not learn from them? And that to me makes no sense. And that's also why I'm very like cynical about school and stuff. It's like the best AI courses like offered by like Stanford or like Andrew Ng or whatever are literally available for free online. So like why not just do what makes sense? I think to sum it up, it's just make good decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of the things that that hit me really profoundly when I was doing my meditation was like basically the key answer to everything in life is just thinking the right thing at the right time. Every single decision you make would be the right one if you always thought the right thing at the right time. It allows you to make good decisions. But somehow it just hit me more profoundly than it would normally. It's cool that you're kind of already thinking about these things. You went into like your emotions and thoughts around people. Yeah, so I had a friend that's I started a business with who is super intelligent, but then he had a bit of a like personality complex where he sort of didn't quite feel he was in touch with like reality and felt like he didn't need other people.
I don't relate to the second part. I totally get the first part. It sounds very similar. I think I'm very out of touch with reality. Like there are times where I literally just feel like I'm never present in my own body, which is why like I think meditation is going to be super helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I remember when I was like a kid sort of having the whole like wondering if the world was a matrix or like if I was in the Truman Show. And I'd never even seen or heard of those movies. I was just having those thoughts all by myself as like a 6-year-old being like, I wonder if my mum's a robot and this kind of stuff. And it's definitely kind of quite funny. But I think something I've realized as I got older is that even though I quite relate to you on being quite independent and not really needing people, I was actually quite quiet as a child. I didn't really speak to people that much and was generally happier by myself. But you still do need people, and I am much more emotional than I thought I was. I mean, I wasn't at the level as my friend I was saying, who kind of generally kind of thought he was a robot in some ways. But I thought that I was more analytical than I am. But like I've read so much into psychology and behavior and realized that actually I'm a pretty useless human that's very emotional and super reliant on other people and my environment on things. It is good to kind of recognize that before you kind of go and do things just because you think you're super awesome as a person.
Oh yeah, that's why I keep setting a bunch of brain dates with people.
Nice.
I'm like, I'm going to set up a 3-hour slot with you and I'm just going to have a brain dump and you're going to help me like have some cool experiences and learn more about you.
Yeah, no, that sounds really great. And back to the thing about being young and getting good advice from people. I think the best, like I'm already compelled to be like, hey, Shifra, if you ever want to like chat, I'm always like available and things. And I think, basically what I've found when I've been trying to get mentors is that if you just listen to people and you kind of take on their advice, people love giving advice. So as long as you sound like you're taking it on, and even if you then don't always use it or you apply things differently, it's quite nice. And if it feels like I'm having an effect on what you're going to do with the rest of your life, I'll keep on giving, if you know what I mean. So if you can make people feel like they're having an effect and doing something when they talk to you, they'll keep on doing it. Whereas if it sounds like you're ignoring them or that you feel like you have better ideas than them anyway. So if you always approach the conversation humbly, then people will like always enjoy having a conversation with you. And yeah, it's kind of my advice for like getting mentorship and stuff, which I think you're already pretty good at it anyway. But that's,
you know, where that first materialized, interestingly enough, was actually with my teachers when I used to go to like traditional physical school. Like it's just so interesting for me to it's, if I could figure out a way to be super emotional and like talk to my teachers in a way where I was like, hey, like I know I'm missing school like for the next 2 weeks because I'm here, but like I just want to thank you for being so supportive. And people just love feeling good about themselves.
Cool. Before we had this conversation, you were asking me some questions, which we could go back to.
Yeah, I think I have this has been such a valuable conversation. I think your mental models are like really interesting. Also, I think you've just had a lot of like really cool life experiences, like North Korea, for example. That's insane. And I'm just curious as to like what kind of catalyzed that. Was it just like I wake up one day and you're like, I'm going to completely like 180 my life, or was it just super gradual?
Yes, it depends. Some things are gradual. Some things were like in the moment. Like the Vipassana was very gradual. Like I was traveling for a whole year and like I met one guy that had done it and he was like, oh, it's great and awesome. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe I should do it. But then I was like, oh wait, taking 10 whole days out of my life. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'm probably not that useful. And like I met another guy and then I sort of was a little bit more compelled. And then like a few months later, I met another person. And then I sort of realized that all of those three people were super awesome and just had like this aura around them of like chill and like just being nice. And I was like, shit, I really want to be like them. and they're all telling this one thing, so I should probably go and do it. Whereas North Korea, I read like one book and was like, crap, this is the most fascinating thing I've ever heard of. I have to go to North Korea. Went online, found that I could do it, and then did it straight away. And I guess I've realized that some things, like if you wait, like it's can make it harder. Like I wanted to do like a 5-day fast where I just didn't eat a single thing.
Interesting.
And I was like, I need to do this at some point in the next few weeks. I don't know. This is a bit awkward. I'll just flip a coin on as to which day I'll do it and just surprise myself. And like literally the moment I'd had that thought, I then flipped the coin and it said, oh, you have to start today. And so I was like, having never even thought about it, I found that I was already 3 hours into my 5-day fast. I was like, oh, me not ever eating for the next 5 days. But it went really well. Actually, this is a podcast to be released, but yeah, the last day was quite bad. Turns out I was actually anemic and I should have seen a doctor beforehand and poor.
Oh.
But yeah, living for the moment was kind of cool.
Would you say you're very like present?
Yeah.
Like, present person, like super grounded in like what's happening in the now?
I'd like to say so. I think the same how I was saying earlier about I used to think I was a bit more analytical than I really am. I think if you'd asked me a few years ago, I'd have said, yeah, I'm super present. And even though I'm probably 5 times more present now than I used to be a few years ago, I would say I'm not crazy present, possibly because of like the past that makes you realize how much of the time you're being an idiot. But I think I'm more present than the average human.
Do you want to kind of walk me through what not being present looks like? Because I obviously have my own like understanding of like what I'm like when I'm not present, but I just want to see how that materializes for other people.
Yeah, that's a good question. By which I mean, that's a really hard to answer question, and Jesus, I don't know what to say. Yeah, being present is, it's really hard to like concentrate fully in the moment, as in, sort of when like you're interviewing, I've learned to be a lot more present because you can be interviewing someone and then you're thinking about, oh, well, I need to ask them this other question and this other question. And you're not really listening to what they're saying. Mm-hmm. And then they finish it and they may have said something really interesting, but you're already ready with your next question. So they may have just answered something about brain computer interfaces and you're like, well, next I need to ask them about their mindsets. And then you don't really follow up on what else could have been really interesting. Whereas I try to listen to you in this conversation and sort of keep the conversation going. So I guess trying to be more present in what's going on directly rather than what you're sort of expecting or planning for is like one way of being present. But then there's lots of stuff where your mind just instantly goes into other things. Trying to notice them can be quite challenging. You know, when you get sort of distracted, it starts with like just trying to be like, able to sit still for a whole hour and just concentrate on your breath is basically impossible, but also the not moving, just sitting still is really, really painful and really hard. And you just have, your body just has this huge overriding urge to like relieve its pain. And if you can override this and say, hey, I don't need to do this right now. When I move later, all this pain will go anyway. Whether I move now, there'll just be a new pain that I'll have to think about. So it doesn't really matter. And you can you start having this barrier in between what you do and what your body is telling you to do.
That is really interesting.
You can then start to master it. You can then sort of have this. So let's say you're concentrating on like writing this really difficult blog post or something or your homework. And then you might have this sort of feeling like, oh, I just need to check Facebook right now. And it will be quite like, I really need to satisfy this urge. But you have this barrier of being like, oh, wait, I don't need to satisfy this urge. I can do this in half an hour's time. And you don't let yourself go off the rails by sort of actually being a bit more present and acknowledging what's going on rather than just sort of being in the moment and letting the moment just drive you without you really noticing what your brain's doing, which is really hard, but you do get better at it, if that maybe answers a little bit.
No, that was actually super, super valuable because I suck at being present. I'm also just naturally like very anxious as a person. And I think that probably like burrs it. Yeah, no, that was super insightful. The whole, like that Facebook analogy that you used, like I can do this later and just being able to disconnect from that. That is interesting.
So much stuff that kind of, you start to have like a little bit of a pain, and same as whether you're hungry or whatever, this thing comes, but then it doesn't usually get any worse, but we're just used to living in this like straight in demand, like I can instantly satisfy this. So you sort of do. Whereas if you realize that actually you can wait a whole hour before you eat your snack, or like you kind of can, and you just stop being so like needy and instantly expecting gratification for stuff, and you actually get much greater satisfaction from doing the thing properly.
Oh, so it's almost like a flow state, I would think.
Yeah, it helps you really get more flow and be
Yeah.
present in just the thing that you're doing rather than constantly being like, because your brain basically is a distraction device, if that makes sense, as in it's constantly seeking other things that it needs to be doing. And it's kind of actually quite awkward being in your brain in like modern society in terms of actually trying to be useful to humanity at the same time.
I'm going to think of this as like a mental model, and clearly like you trained it by meditating, right? Is there anything else that you'd suggest?
What, to help with that? So yeah, it's like a two-pronged attack, I guess. So one way is training yourself, which is actually the harder way in many ways. So as in you can think of it like, I guess I'm quite bad at snacking in the afternoon, for example. So let's say I pack a bunch of snacks with me and I go out and I eat my lunch. All afternoon, I will literally eat every single snack I have on me. Like I just can't stop myself. Whereas if I don't take any snacks, I don't need to think, hey, Sam, don't snack, because there are no snacks. There's nothing in my environment to make me do the thing I don't want to do. So it's much easier to have an environment where there is no distraction anyway. So if you're always liable to go on to Facebook on your phone when you're not sure what to do, or when when you're just sort of having a slight weak moment in thought, then if you don't have Facebook on your phone, you're never going to go onto it because you don't have it there. So if you can optimize your environment for all your weaknesses, it's a lot easier than trying to battle against your weaknesses. Because if you're kind of a human and it's not that easy to completely change your psychology, it does certainly help with the meditating. You're more likely to notice when you fuck up and be like, oh wait, okay, I'm really bad at stopping myself from doing this thing. So I'll then work on my environment. Whereas the meditating part helps you realize the mistakes that you're making, and you kind of recognize when you're being weak. If you weren't able to deal with your weakness, you can sort of then take the meta approach of, okay, I'll just change my environment so that I'll acknowledge that I'm not very good at this thing, but it won't be a problem.
That is actually a really helpful way to think of it. I've been trying to like for example, I don't work really well in my room. And I was like, how do I optimize my room to just be able to work better here? And so far, nothing has seemed to help. But it's also, I think it's really easy to fall into like a negative feedback loop when you don't succeed at something and you're like, oh, like I'm just never going to get better at it. Yeah. That is, I'm going to look deeper into that. I don't think a lot, it resonates with me, but I would also like want to look into it deeper because it sounds so fascinating. I'm just not a very present person. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. So when you say you're not a present person, does that mean as in you struggle to like pay attention to people when you're having conversations and things, or?
Oh no, it's so weird to explain. I depersonalize. So basically the way I process things is like a very out of body experience. Every time, like, let's say I'm having a conversation, I won't figure out, I don't know how to react to it. I'll just like automatically like shut myself up in my own head. And it's like, I won't feel like I'm in my body anymore. Like I legitimately feel like a huge disconnect between my mind and my body, to a point where I don't think it's healthy, because like sometimes I'll hurt myself, for example, and I just won't feel it. I'll just be like, okay, cool, whatever. It's really weird.
Yeah, I completely relate to you. And yeah, it's one of those things that you don't really know how to explain or talk to people about.
Really
We're not really that well equipped to sort of explain these things. And I don't know about you, but I've had like close deaths in my family and things where I just didn't really know what to feel, or
yeah, literally. Oh my god.
Everyone else around me would be like crying and things, and I'd just be like, I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel bad about like other things, as in,
holy crap,
I don't think they want me to be sad. Yeah, it's quite deep. There are other things, where you just, something happens and it pisses you off and you do kind of get angry and you're straight there in your emotions, but there's lots of stuff where you're just there like, you're just kind of being a bit like weird about it and like have some out of body stuff. But on the meditation thing, they do kind of try to get you to be a bit more out of body, because if you can be less egocentric and less like stuck in all your own problems, and think a bit more of like, okay, my conscious entity, then there's this physical entity called Sam on the planet that's doing stuff, and then there's everything else on the planet that Sam can react with. And if you kind of detach yourself, as in your mind, from yourself, you can be a bit more analytical. Okay, how can Sam have the best effect on the rest of humanity and do good things? Whereas if you're kind of in yourself in the moment the whole time, you're kind of a little bit preoccupied with, oh, how can I look good right now? Oh, how can I eat more, or whatever. And whereas when you're sort of being a bit more higher level about everything, it's quite cool, and you can be a much kinder and happier person. can be a bit weird when you have these sort of things where everyone's behaving a bit differently to you and you're a bit there just wondering like, wait, should I behave differently right now? Or I don't know. And
that's the thing. It's like, I feel super detached from the emotions that I feel, but also I'm such an emotional person. And I, like, in my mind, I'm trying to figure out a way to like basically tie all of that together neatly. And I don't know, it's like, I don't feel a lot of extreme emotions because I'm like obviously very detached, but I'm also not going to say that I'm not an emotional person because I know I am. The reason I'm super emotional is because I emulate other people's emotions. And it's just weird. Like, I don't know if it's like right or wrong, and I obviously don't want to like fall into a negative feedback loop where I'm like, I suck at this and I'm always going to suck at this.
Yeah, it does kind of make sense to go with what other people are doing, but it's nice to have the ability to choose as well, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, for sure.
When everyone gets like pissed off about the latest trend or iPhone and things, and be like, actually, wait, do I need to worry about this? Okay, maybe not. And then you can kind of just be happier rather than being stressed out about stuff. Yeah, certainly a few of my friends have got little sisters and they literally can't take themselves off Instagram or Facebook, and they're just so obsessed with these things that are really not healthy for them. And I hope that maybe you don't have such an obsession because...
Oh no, I deleted all my socials. Yeah, legend. It's just constant dopamine. And it's like the withdrawal is so bad. It's like I will literally be picking up my phone and just mindlessly scrolling through it. This is not healthy. Like, what am I doing? Yeah,
really good book is called Why Buddhism is True. It's not really about proving that Buddhism is true as a religion. So it's kind of about Vipassana and like the brain, but it's from an evolutionary psychologist.
Oh, interesting.
Super deep into why your brain does all these things and all the algorithms and stuff that are kind of running by default. And like the way that our brain is optimized for what we evolved in as sort of apes and living in like the sort of tribal things that is completely not reality anymore. And we have all these weird fallacies that are completely...
Oh, so it's like cognitive dissonance almost. Because our environment is so different. Oh, okay, yeah.
So cool. That's a really, like, I think of any book I've read, that's the most amount of notes I've ever made. I think I've made like 50 pages worth of notes. I've basically made like a mini book myself. I probably like my biggest recommendation to you if you're like into all these things, which you seem to be.
That is awesome.
Yeah, any other questions?
No, I've got to head out soon. But yeah, this was super valuable.
I learned so much,
I learned so much. And you're also like, you also ask like super insightful questions and I'm like, yes. Like, and then like you also add so much value and I'm like, yes. Yeah. It was really nice talking to you.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I'll try and send any other recommendations I have that I think are useful for you in terms of perhaps on the podcast and yeah, it would be quite fascinating for me to maybe follow your journey a bit because this is so fascinating. I'd love to kind of see what you're up to maybe in like 3 months time on a podcast.
Cool.
And yeah, have a great brain date that you're about to go and have. and have a nice summer with consulting and all these things.
All right, thank you. You too.
Thank you. All right. Well, enjoy.
All right, take care.
Well, there you go. So it would be my greatest pleasure to have any of your feedback or questions from this episode. It was a really hard-hitting episode, so I think it might inspire a few questions, and I'd be really excited to chat about it all with you if you want to know more about anything that we mentioned. The show notes will have links to all the different things that we did talk about. This includes my epic notes on the Why Buddhism is True book, which I highly advise you check out if you want to know more about what the hell your brain is doing and why. Another related book to the stuff we talk about is called Nudge, which is all about how we can shape our environment to improve our lives. And I've also written a blog post which is called Working on It instead of Working in It, which is all about stopping yourself getting caught up in things that you don't want to be doing and making your environment make you think and behave in the way that you want to. I've recently launched a new podcast which is called How to Think, which is directly about making you think the right thing at the right time and building mental models for making the most from life. And each episode is just a 25-minute deep dive explaining a concept and how to use it to be a smarter and consistently better human. So I think that's quite related to this episode and you might want to check that out. The BBC Tech for Good series that I mentioned was called The Big Life Fix, and it's really cool. And the bracelet that I spoke about that helped people with Parkinson's was built by Haiyan Zhang, who aspirationally I'm going to try and get on the podcast because she seemed pretty cool. And yes, finally, Shifra's blog, which sparked this entire episode, is a great resource to learn about brain-computer interfaces. It's brilliantly written and a really helpful introduction to the whole topic, and I couldn't recommend it more highly. And yes, a truly fascinating young lady. It's going to be very exciting to follow her journey and see what she does with her life. we will definitely be having her back on the podcast for future conversations and insights. And thank you for listening. You've just listened to an episode of the Growth Mindset podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe on your preferred app and give me a good rating, as these go a really long way. If you are unable to give good feedback right now, try sharing the show with a friend who will, or just wait for the show to improve. If you have any ideas for the show or you just want to chat, then please reach out to me on Twitter @SamHarrisTweets or Instagram @SamJamSnaps. Show notes and other links to topics discussed in the episodes are available at the website growthmindsetpodcast.com. Thanks so much for listening. Give yourself a big hug from me. If you're with a friend, give them a hug as well. And I hope you enjoy your next podcast.